Bear Lake straddles the border of Utah and Idaho. It's been called the Caribbean of the Rockies because of its stunning blue turquoise glow. But despite the quaint charm of the towns at its shores, or the fact that the lake attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors each year, there's a more sinister secret swimming beneath the surface. The full-length version of this documentary can be seen on Amazon Prime. Please also keep watching to the very end of this video for more interesting information and insights. Finally, make sure to check out our list of destination spots nearby.
Okay, so this is a different store that has these t-shirts, but we had something like this. It was more like a silhouette of the Bear Lake Monster. It was huge. In fact, we had the same customers coming back wanting the Bear Lake Monster stuff, and
it's become, kind of a mascot, a source of local pride and fun for the people up there.
People like to print t-shirts and wear t-shirts, and for a long time there was a boat that went around the lake where tourists can get on. And
I mean, it's always going to be the Bear Lake Monster. People come up and, have you seen the Bear Lake Monster? It's so famous here that it really holds dear in our hearts, those who live here.
I am a children's author, and I have written the book about Bear Lake and the monster that lives in Bear Lake. This is the picture where we saw. He jumps in up here. It's Bear Lake, and he swims down, 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 down. And then you turn the book upside down, and he's coming up in Scotland. So there's no bottom to the lake. He just goes clear through. And there's the Loch Ness Monster right there.
I suspect the Bear Lake Monster probably has a really good appetite for raspberry shakes in this day and age, but I've never seen it.
There's been a lot of investigation over the years, and I guess I'm just not a very big believer in monsters anyway. It's just kind of a fun thing.
The monster may have a fun and fascinating allure on locals and tourists alike, but the Bear Lake Monster didn't start for the sake of selling trinkets and t-shirts. Sightings were reported as early as the mid-1800s, and many say that the monster was a piece of the native Shoshone tribe's stories long before that. The first sightings were reported in the Deseret News by Joseph C. Rich. He and his father, Charles C. Rich, were among the first settlers in the area. In July of 1868, the Deseret News published an article directly from the pen of Joseph C. Rich himself.
The Indians say there's a monster animal which lives in the lake that has captured and carried away Indians while in the lake. They represent it as being of the serpent kind. Since the settlement of this valley, several persons have reported seeing a huge animal of some kind that they could not describe. Mr. S.M. Johnson saw something in the lake he thought to be a drowned person. He thought it would soon wash into shore. Some kind of animal that he'd never seen before raised out of the water. He did not see the body, only the head and what he supposed to be a part of the neck. It had ears or bunches on the side of its head, nearly as large as a pint cup. The waves at times would dash over its head, but it would throw water from its mouth and nose.
Rich continued to write to the Deseret News about other sightings. 15 other witnesses were reported to have seen the monster or a family of monsters. Many of them said they told Rich they saw an incredibly large monster of brownish color swimming at an impossible speed. At least 3 prominent men in the state reported talking with several of these witnesses and testified to their belief that their experiences seemed truthful. whether these stories sprung from the untamed imaginations of people from the past, or whether there really is something lurking in the depths. What does seem clear is that neither the early pioneer settlers nor the native Shoshone tribe understood how old and unique Bear Lake is.
I guess you could say most lakes are ephemeral. They don't last very long. I mean, they fill in with sediment relatively quickly.
They've done some coring in the bottom of Bear Lake. We know that Bear Lake is at least 250,000 years old.
They've estimated based on fault movement, the lake could be millions of years old.
But Bear Lake has 4 endemic species which are found nowhere else in the world, and that makes it really a unique body of water. Now, usually when you have a fish that's endemic, it's usually threatened or endangered. That's not the case with any of the 4 fish on Bear Lake. Those species also serve as a food base for some of the higher predators in the lake. There was some evidence that some of the endemic species in Bear Lake right now were also found in ancient Lake Bonneville when Bonneville was here.
If I had to guess, I would say Bear Lake is certainly in the top 50 in the world as far as age of lakes. So every time there's an earthquake, the valley drops a few feet and the mountains pop up a little. So this is what keeps Bear Lake continually renewed as a lake.
So I'm always interested in the Bear Lake monster, and do I believe that it's real? Do I believe there's a creature in the lake? Not necessarily, but do I believe there could be? I absolutely believe there could be. So I have a master's degree in science, and I always like to think, you know, there's no definite conclusion you can draw about the Bear Lake monster is real or it's not. But what you can do is ask some questions and kind of look and compile the evidence. And when we go all around this area, not too far away from here, there's Fossil Butte in Wyoming. There's tons and tons of aquatic fossils. And so there's been plesiosaur fossils, ichthyosaur fossils, elasmosaurus, mosasaur, all these different kinds of fossils that are similar to what the Bear Lake monster has been described as. They've been found all around this region. There absolutely, no doubt about it, used to be a Bear Lake monster type creature living here. The only question is whether one could have survived and still lives in Bear Lake.
Yeah, the maximum given depth is 208 feet. I've never seen it, of course. I'm not even sure anyone really has.
The average depth of Bear Lake is about 85 feet. And so that gives Bear Lake an incredible amount of volume of water. In fact, the volume of water is so big that you could fit nearly 2 entire Flaming Gorge volumes into one Bear Lake volume.
People don't go down there in submarines, so they're never gonna come across it. So there could be a creature lurking on the bottom of Bear Lake that just doesn't come up high.
And it's riddled with underground plumbing, springs, sinkholes, and no doubt there would be karst-like topography like caves.
I don't think on the scale of a Bear Lake monster that it could really exist in Bear Lake, just because we've done enough work on the lake, we would have seen it by now.
I think the larger the creature, the smaller the water body, the more implausible it is to find something new. Having said that, there might be some discoveries in Bear Lake in the future.
There are other species that are out there in Bear Lake that I don't think have been described yet, whether it's the freshwater jellyfish or these endemic ostracods that are little critters that live along the bottom of the lake. There's still a lot of work to be done on Bear Lake.
May or June of 1977, and I think it was 2 or 3 of us, maybe there was even 4, but we borrowed a canoe. Now it was very cold this night. The moon, I think, was pretty full. At that time, I was not aware of a blue lake monster or anything like that. But it was really calm, and so we paddled out a little ways, and all of a sudden, as we were sitting there, a big channel of water that looked like about 20 feet long and about 2 feet wide started to make waves. And the waves were moving forward. We were all freaking out. What was that? What was that? And it lasted for about 3 minutes. And the waves got up to be to the top of the boat. So that's probably about 18 inches. It about swamped our boat. So we were very concerned about that. So they were within 2 or 3 feet of us, almost underneath us.
One time I was on the east side of the lake. It was in the middle of January. It was about 20 below zero. I looked out in the lake. The lake was like glass, calm, and yet out in the middle of the lake I could see something very pronounced. It was moving rhythmically back and forth, and it was right along the water surface. I went up and got a spotting scope, and a 60 power spotting scope, and zoomed in, and lo and behold, it was a herd of elk that were swimming across the lake.
No, it wasn't elk. I know what elk look like.
But no, I'm very familiar with elk. I'm talking to you now from a home that I have in Rio Dosa, New Mexico, and I wake up every morning to cow and bull elks in my yard. So it wasn't an elk. And basically, we were just sitting there, and I'm sitting at the driver's seat, and I looked out in front of the boat about probably 30 yards, and I saw a big wave, a whitecap. And I thought to myself, what in the world would cause a wave when there's no boat traffic or anything like that? And then immediately after that, I watched something come out of the water the first time, and this whole experience probably lasted maybe 20 or 30 seconds. I wish I'd had the clarity of mind of grabbing my iPhone and taking a picture or a video, but this thing had to be probably at least 40 feet long. And after the first time, my daughter was looking the same direction I was, and she said, Dad, she said, oh my gosh, Dad, what is that? Look at that, what is that?
At first, I thought it must be a boat because of the sudden wake and the waves that we saw out of nowhere. And then I thought it was one of those giant long tubes that people ride on, except black. Then I saw it come up out of the water and go back down like a huge black shiny serpent. I could see 2 different parts of its body at the same time, going up and down, then disappearing into the water as if it was serpenting up and down. My dad and I both said, oh my gosh, did you see that? And then we both saw it again together. When we got back to the marina to turn the boat in, my dad was telling the guys working in the shop about what we saw. We were both slightly worked up about it, and they just said, sir, read the wall.
And I told him what I saw, and he said, look on the wall. And so I looked on the wall, and there was a newspaper article, but they said in 2013 there was a sighting, and he said, you saw the Bear Lake monster, is what he basically said. And I've never heard of a Bear Lake monster.
When I Googled it and found the images, the long serpent-like ones in the water that were shiny blackish looked exactly like what we both saw.
My wife keeps a journal of everything we do, but it was on my anniversary in 2018. It wasn't this past August, it was a year from August.
We're working at the shop. There was this one time that this older gentleman came in. He leans on the counter and he tells me this whole story about how they were on the water fishing and the water started to move next to the boat. And they thought it was a school of fish, and it just kept getting wider and wider and longer as it rose to the surface, and they could see the top of this monster.
Where I've been out fishing on the lake, and I was looking at my sonar and I see a big blob on the sonar, and so the natural instinct is you want to look over the side. Bear Lake has very clear water. We looked down and you could literally see thousands of cisco below the boat in a very tightly packed school, and the sonar units recognize that as one entity or one object rather than a whole bunch of objects. And seeing literally, I've been out one time where I saw a bunch of little ripples on the surface next to the boat, and it was cisco that were right along the surface, and I'm sure that they probably followed the food up off the bottom. or they were chased by a predator up off the bottom and they rose up to try to get away from the predator, and then they just hit the surface of the water.
And it was solid. It was not flutterings of water. It was not little pieces of anything. It was a solid something, and then it went back down into the water.
I've seen boils of bass kind of like how, and they're all moving. You know, fish move their tail back and forth. And there wasn't any indication of like the water being agitated with fish.
I grew up not too far from Galveston, Texas, and I've been deep sea fishing, and I do a lot of saltwater fishing, and it wasn't a school of fish. This was a solid animal. This thing was black. There was no scales. It looked shiny, like a tortoise, or maybe like a shark or a tortoise, but I've never seen anything like that at all. But I know what I saw.
It was just smooth humps.
I've learned over the years, I listen to people, what they have to say, and they explain what they saw, and they ask me what I think, and then I explain what I think, but that's as far as I go. I don't try to argue with them. They might have seen something that maybe I've never seen before.
Nearly 30 years after the first Bear Lake Monster article appeared in the newspaper, Joseph C. Rich sent out a letter addressed to the people of Bear Lake Valley about the launch of his new steamboat.
I discovered and made famous by publication in the Deseret News that wonderful first-class lie, the Bear Lake Monster.
Joseph C. Rich may have confessed making up stories about the Bear Lake Monster, but stories and sightings about the monster continued. If his stories were indeed tall tales, it still seems to be largely mysterious how Joseph C. Rich convinced many prominent figures in the community to go along with his first-class lie, or why so many of the community members defended the monster story. And why have reportings of unexplainable sightings from eyewitnesses continued to this day, especially eyewitnesses that didn't know anything about the Bear Lake Monster prior to their experiences?
The first documented instances that we have of the Bear Lake Monster come from the late 1800s in newspaper articles reporting on local stories about a pre-existing lake monster. We don't have any documentation of those pre-existing local stories. That's not a thing that we know about, so there is debate as to whether or not the newspaper articles were made up out of whole cloth to be entertaining or to be a hoax or anything like that, or whether there really were pre-existing narratives. If the Bear Lake Monster were 100% complete hoax, irrelevant today, we wouldn't be talking about it. The fact that we're talking about it today means there's something that legend, that creature is tapping into that keeps it in our current psyche.
My ancestors were some of the early Cook ancestors that helped settle the Bear Lake Valley. In the late 1800s, my great-grandfather, Alonzo Hallam Cook, said he saw the Bear Lake Monster at least twice in his life. He saw a ways off what he thought was a big log in the lake. It looked like about 9 feet long, and he didn't really think much about it, but as he got up to go home, the log rose up out of the water and swam away. Oh, yeah, I believe that there was something.
You know, monster stories remind us that this place is not entirely tameable. It is still wild. And that is definitely Bear Lake. There's still that wild natural beauty there. and we're drawn to that, and we like to talk about it, and stories like the Bear Lake Monster become metaphors for that.
We hope you've enjoyed this documentary. We encourage you to dig into the primary and secondary sources yourself. In the description of the YouTube video, we've included links to Utah State University's digital archives on the Bear Lake Monster, as well as links to images, newspaper articles, books, and more. Most interviews for this documentary were filmed in various unique locations. At the shores of Bear Lake, at Cody's Gastro Garage, a local restaurant, and the Bear Lake KOA gift shop, which sells Bear Lake Monster t-shirts. The locations of each interview have been provided through on-screen text in the lower third of the screen. In addition to this, some of the eyewitnesses could not be recorded on camera for various reasons. In some instances, voice actors were used to read the accounts of real people. Make sure to check out our list of destination spots nearby in the description of the YouTube video. We've also posted other interesting videos to our YouTube channel, including a Bear Lake travel video and a few of the full-length interviews we've conducted. Our contact information is also provided. Finally, you can see an extended version of this documentary on Amazon Prime.
There doesn't really need to be consensus for a legend to thrive. And in fact, the more disagreement there is about a legend, the better that legend does sometimes. Legends are a genre of folklore that rely on discussion, back and forth, disagreement, debate, consideration of what the possibilities are. Legends